recently having quite a different opinion about this. I think that the text was standardized by Uthman. So that's the third caliph. And in that sense, of course, the Quran as we have it goes back to the time of the companions of the Prophet, because Uthman knew the Prophet. So he was a companion of the Prophet. But, that's kind of playing with words. Sure, he's a companion of the Prophet, and sure, he standardized the Quran, but, Muhammad had been dead for, I think, almost 20 years by that time. So, it's not quite the same thing. So arguments for why it goes back to Uthman, I think, are pretty extensive. So, a couple of reasons why we can make an argument for it is like, okay, if you look at all the manuscripts that we have today, except for the palimpsest that you kind of hinted at already, they are all incredibly similar, to the point that, they copy even the tiniest differences in spelling. Even things that we don't quite understand why they would be spelled that way are being copied very consistently that way. And so that shows very clearly that the manuscripts were being copied from a single origin, right? A single archetype, as we call it. And so we can be pretty sure...
listen to this again.
So that's standardized by Uthman. I'm known to be a proponent, I think that's more or less the mainstream opinion right now. Shoemaker famously and recently having quite a different opinion about this. I think that the text was standardized by Uthman. So that's the third caliph. And in that sense, of course, the Quran as we have it goes back to the time of the companions of the Prophet, because Uthman knew the Prophet. So he was a companion of the Prophet. But, that's kind of playing with words. Sure, he's a companion of the Prophet, and sure, he standardized the Quran, but, Muhammad had been dead for, I think, almost 20 years by that time. So, it's not quite the same thing. So arguments for why it goes back to Uthman, I think, are pretty extensive. So, a couple of reasons why we can make an argument for it is like, okay, if you look at all the manuscripts that we have today, except for the palimpsest that you kind of hinted at already, they are all incredibly similar, to the point that, they copy even the tiniest differences in spelling. Even things that we don't quite understand why they would be spelled that way are being copied very consistently that way. And so that shows very clearly that the manuscripts were being copied from a single origin, right? A single archetype, as we call it. And so we can be pretty sure what that text said. Really to not just the details of words, like we can say to the details of spellings. And that is, that's something that doesn't even come into discussion for the New Testament or something like that. Most of the words you're like, well, even if we do know what the exact word was, we don't know how it was spelled. And with the Quran, you absolutely can. But you only get back to Uthman, right? You only get back to this standardization effort. And so, I think it is a decent claim. So we have this text that goes back. And we have radiocarbon dating of these manuscripts. And they go back to the 7th century, mid-7th century. And we have a whole bunch of them by now, and all of them point to the same time. Like, so early, I think that it's really quite difficult to claim that it's someone other than Uthman. That's kind of where we get purely with the material evidence. We get back to Uthman. Yeah.
Can I ask you this? So first of all, I want to paint a picture here for our audience, especially our Muslim friends who come in for my sake. It wouldn't matter.
Hey, Reese's, thank you.
It really wouldn't matter to me if we had Muhammad's thumbprint on a manuscript. He's like, this.
I'm listening to Derek Mythvision interviewing Marijn van Putten. Marijn van Putten, who's a scholar, academic studying the origin of the Quran, or rather the Mus'haf. And the earliest we can trace it back to is Uthman, which is at least 20 years after Muhammad. He standardized it. And we don't know what happened before then, it seems.
This is the one I approve. Here are the words that I believe are from God, and therefore, like, I definitely think he said some things, and I definitely think that we have good reason to think a lot of what he said is in the Quran. I personally have no beef in this at all. I'm purely interested in the facts and the historical methodology that we can go back and glean. So in light of what we just said, I don't really care if it did go back. I care in the sense of what really is the case, right? Like, not like, oh my gosh, if it doesn't go back, I'm going to lose my potential. I have no faith in this, right? So it's not like I'm going to have a problem here. But I am curious to know if we actually know that some of these manuscripts, really for sure we can know go to Uthman. And I'm not saying like, hey, these are somehow dated using carbon dating. You have kind of a 50-year back and forth. Like, is it the end of the 7th century? Is it the... My point is are we certain that we have Uthman's actual text?
Yeah. Well, we certainly aren't certain that we have one of his master copies. So if we look at the tradition, and the tradition I think is nicely confirmed by the material evidence, it really seems like there were 4 master copies made that were distributed across the Islamic Empire. So this is Haytham Sidki's work that has recently been published in the Journal for the International Quranic Studies Association. And it shows, there were 4 copies made. One was stayed in Medina, one was sent to Kufa, one to Basra, and one to Syria, probably to Hims, maybe to Damascus. And these differ a little bit from one another. Tiny, tiny differences. So we're talking about like 40-ish words that they differ from one another, but they're there.
So the Uthman distributed 4 different master copies. And there are tiny differences. There are words, about 40 words. 40 words or 400? It's here.
40-ish words that they differ from one another.
Around 40 words.
And all of that ties in very nicely to, yes, there was a single empire-wide distribution event that distributed this text. And so whether we have one of those 4 master copies, we don't know. We have early dated manuscripts, early enough that, the radiocarbon dating certainly allows for the possibility that it's literally one of the copies of these.
Allows for the possibility. We don't know the probability and whether it is.
Master copies, but it could be a copy of that copy or a copy of that copy, right? That we can't know for sure.
Could be a copy of the copy of the copy.
Every now and then I kind of fantasize about it. It's like, what if we're actually looking at one of these? But we don't know. We don't know. What we do know is that, there's a couple of these big master copies that you see from a couple of different places. And they say, this is the one that was sent by Uthman, etc. And all of these are always later, beautiful, monumental copies. And those ones aren't the oldest ones. The oldest ones look very unassuming. They are very economical. So they have very large pages of parchment, which are completely filled up to the absolute, there's no margins at all. Right? So they really used all of the parchment. And that's kind of how they fill up the text. And to our eyes, those, I think they're beautiful, but they're not beautiful in the same way.
Clarina, thanks for liking the live.
Those are really, really impressive. And these ones are somewhat less pretty to look at. These are the manuscripts that we usually call Hijazi manuscripts, which is a terrible name because it seems to suggest that Hijazi manuscripts come from the Hijaz, which is the region
Zayan, hello.
The Quran was composed, or at least revealed, as the tradition would say. And there's no reason to think that script style is necessarily from that region, etc., etc. But it's a
Looks like the Muslims are late sleepers.
Name we use, Hijazi manuscripts. Those are the earliest. We don't know. We don't know if we have one of the copies, but they are so similar to one another that through textual criticism we can make very, very reasonable guesses about what that Uthmanic text looked like. Now there's the other question of, but do we know what it says? And that's an issue that we kind of run into with the Arabic script, and certainly the early Arabic script, which doesn't write vowels because they hadn't invented vowels yet, and quite irregularly writes consonantal dots. And as a result, we get different reading traditions of the Quran. There's a couple of them.
So it's interesting. So as a result, we get different reading traditions of the Quran.
That read words differently in certain places. And both work with the consonantal skeleton of the text. There's two ways of reading it, and it's just, well, which one is it? Well, which one did Muhammad actually say in that case? The traditional answer there is, of course, Muhammad said both of it, or all of it. And all of that was revealed by Gabriel, and all of that was sent down by God. But we, of course, don't know. And that is something that, especially the early exegetes, were actually very interested in. They're like, okay, well, there are several ways of reading this verse. Which one is the best way?
Pock.
And they would say, I don't.
Pock, I am watching an interview by Derek Mythvision. He's interviewing an academic called Marijn van Putten, who studies the Quran origins. And the question here is, does the Quran go back to Muhammad? And the furthest back that they can go points to, and it's not certain, but it points to Uthman, which is 20 years after Muhammad, and points to Uthman having created 4 master copies of the Quran, and even those 4 have slight differences. There's about 40 words that are different. And at the time, they didn't have any consonants, so they just wrote with a basic Arabic script. And as a result, there were different readings. Right? So you weren't sure of the word. Bit loose, it's a bit uncertain.
Don't like this very much. Grammatically, it's not very good. And obviously, God can't make grammatical mistakes, so therefore that reading can't be God's words, or probably not at least. So there's this kind of question of, what's going on with that. And there's a real evaluation of these variants. But when we're looking at when these variants start showing up and we start talking about them very specifically, and when they start being recorded, we're talking about people.
What do you mean with 40 translated pages? Translated from Arabic too. So you've read 40 pages of the Quran that was translated from Arabic too? Arabic to English. Okay. Pock, where are you from? Are you Muslim? If you have only read 40, I think you're not Muslim.
People who are about a century after Uthman. And so that's a kind of second layer, and that layer is actually a lot later than the Quranic text. And there's a lot of disagreement. So it's hard to say, can we really say what that says? And, I think you wanted to say something in between.
Yeah, something about what you just said, so we can zoom in a little here. It sounds like that's more of a faith position.
So, Pock, Joburg, South Africa, yeah, I'm in Cape Town area. When you use the word spirituality, we can talk about this at some point. I think according to the Muslims, they don't. Some of the guys I've spoken to question the spirituality thing. I would also question that, but from a different perspective. Faz, the live is about the origins of the Quran. How far back can we trace it? And what I'm watching is, does the Quran go back to Muhammad? It's an interview by Derek Mythvision of an academic called Marijn van Putten. So before we go spirituality, we must first define that. And spirit is a very old way of thinking about things. And we don't know if it exists. I think there's something out there, but we don't know what it is or can't describe it yet. Let me answer Hans quickly. which means I'm going to mute my mic here. Or maybe I'll let you hear him. Herr Gries,
Greece for peace.
how are you doing?
God bless. I'm lying in bed here.
Ah,
I see
okay.
the sun is shining.
Yes, unfortunately.
Very nice, eh?
No, I like the rain.
My goodness. I have to buy. How's things are with you?
All right. My kids are coming through today, but they're gonna go and visit friends to say goodbye.
Who?
My children.
Who's coming? But they're coming through.
Yeah.
And then they're going to the other place.
Yeah. Then they're going to say goodbye to their friends, pack up some more of the stuff.
Oh, I see. Yeah. What about the clothing and all that? Aren't you must fetch it from the mother?
Yes, I've already fetched some of the stuff. They're gonna get the rest today.
Oh, I see. Okay. I just want to say, well, tomorrow it will not happen lunch. I'm going out to being invited to Eimer here, you know.
Okay.
But you know, you're not available anyway if the kids are here. Then.
Yeah. So that's good. I'm happy that you're busy.
Yes, you're getting a bit busy of late years.
Okay, this is good.
Where is the wife?
Clarina, she's at work.
Yeah. And tomorrow also?
Yeah, tomorrow also. Yeah, she's going to be busy. She's going to be very busy for the next 2 weeks because they're moving that store.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I have learned not to send SMSs, you know.
Yes?
And there is a pad the finger you always get across other letters as well.
Yes.
So there is like a pencil what you use. Where you get those pencils?
Ah, okay. So,
It's like a rubber pouch in front, you know.
yeah. So I think you can get some of those pencils at any one of these stores, at any one of the Pakistani stores or any one of the cell phone stores.
I went to Crazy. They haven't got it, but they say P&A. So I'm going this morning to Walworth, and they still has a P&A shop there, you know.
Yes.
I think they might have it, you know.
Yeah, they might test it first because I think also that it might work better with a different phone, maybe that's made for the pointing device for the pencil.
Oh, I see. So Samsung, you must get a Samsung, right?
Yeah, there's a Samsung Note. I think it's called a Note that will work well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Albert, and have a nice weekend.
Okay, Hans, you too. Have a good one.
And then stack there, you get.
It's you busy. It sounds like you're going to need more sterkte.
Yeah, mooi loop then. Okay.
Okay, go well. Bye.
Oh, goodbye.
So that was Hans. Hans is 86 years old. Hans is an 86-year-old German man whose father used to be was a Nazi. And he was 9 years old when the Second World War ended. Let's continue with listening.
You've kind of been describing some of the faith position, the idea that there are variant reading traditions. And really, I want to be fair here, right? Because I know Christianity. I always use analogies. I know my Christian audience is probably sick of it. Why do you have to bring it back to Christianity? Listen, because I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this. In Christianity...
Nisha, the live is about the origins of the Quran. And what can we know about it? Not believe about it, know about it. Not what we're being told, but can actually go and check out and know. Name a car for an edit. That doesn't even make sense. What do you mean? And you have a flag in a hand like this.
We have Jesus saying all sorts of stuff. And I just had a question yesterday that I asked Harold Attridge, who is a Roman Catholic. He is a believer, but he's also a no-joke critical scholar. And he said, and the question...
These guys are very difficult to find when you have a believer that's not an apologist, but who's a proper academic. No, Faz, I'm not Christian. Nisa, when you're saying that the Quran is the only true book that has not been, I don't know what else, you are just preaching. You are just making the claim. What is the actual, real, checkable, verifiable evidence for that? You need to learn how that works, how claims work versus having evidence for the claim.
Did Jesus say before Abraham was, I am? Like, I am. He says, no, that was the author of John. Now, Christians have...
Yeah, you presuppose the existence of Allah when you say that. You need to go and show the evidence for that. You can't just claim it and as if it's true. Yeah, listen, I like Mozart. Yeah, so that's why we listen to the academic who actually studied this stuff.
No problem, or at least some. The fundamentalists do. The ones that have more of an absolute desperation that every word that said, oh, Jesus said it all. Oh, no, all the women were at the tomb, but this...
He's using an example of Christianity and what Christians say when they make certain claims, just like Muslims make claims, but they don't distinguish the actual evidence that you have or don't have for the claim. No, I'm not atheist.
This one only emphasizes one or two of them. Oh, no, Peter and John were at the tomb, or the beloved disciple, whoever might be.
Depends how you define atheist.
Peter, and my point is they harmonize everything. And I think I saw where Professor Shadi Nasser was talking about how over time there were multiple canonization kind of processes, not just with the text with Uthman, but these reading traditions and variants even get canonized. So they're not contradictions. They're kind of sacred in their own right. Muhammad said it all. And in fact, the various different reading traditions. What is the technical term for that when there's like ahruf or something? I can't.
Yeah. Well. So there's multiple sides to this. Now you're really opening up a kind of worms.
Okay.
So when we're talking about the reading traditions, we're talking about qira'at, which sometimes get mixed up with ahruf.
The qira'at of the mushaf.
Within the tradition sometimes. But they're slightly different, but they're related to this because the question, well, like I said, it's a kind of worms. So there's this tradition.
Yes, Faz. Just in terms of the Clarina, thank you for the likes. That is brilliant. Enjoy your work. Just in terms of using the language correctly, Faz, when you're making a statement in philosophy, you're saying something, it might be a belief, it might be faith, you're making a claim, you're making a statement. And that statement could be believable or not. And a wise person, just Lorena, thank you for all the likes. That statement might be true or not. How do we know whether it's true or not? A wise person would proportion their belief levels according to the evidence. And when you have evidence, you don't need faith.
Of Muhammad that he revealed the Quran, the Quran was revealed, let's say, or sent down in 7 ahruf. We don't know what that word means. It means edge, it means word, it means letter. Well, 7 letters doesn't make sense.
Iggy popped. I don't think I've ever listened to Iggy Pop. What are we talking about? 0 evidence for? And how do you define evidence?
7 words doesn't make sense. 7 edges doesn't make sense. So everybody's like, well, it probably means something slightly more than that, but who knows exactly what?
Yes, correct. I would agree with you that there is zero evidence for God. But it would depend also on how you define that. And whenever, my take is, whenever we speak of God, we're in the area of philosophy. We're in the area of metaphysics and philosophy. And yes, exactly, prove it. But you can't prove God because prove is a mathematical term. It applies specifically to mathematics, although it is also used in court. So the better wording to use for that is show me the evidence for God. And then it depends on how you define evidence. And believers' standards of evidence, or what they think is evidence, is very, very low. Standards of evidence. In fact, it isn't even evidence. It's my big problem with it is that it's mostly hearsay. Correct, Iggy Pop. So this is why I'm an agnostic. It's because you cannot, technically speaking, you cannot show it either way. You cannot prove nor disprove God. We just don't know. But for all practical purposes, we just live as if there is not, because there's no evidence for that, proper evidence. Yeah, Jafar, when you make statements like that, you are in the area of philosophy. You are hypothesizing. You are positing things. Yes, Nisa, all religions are based on hearsay, as far as I know, but I'm limited in my religious knowledge. Grew up a Christian, so I've got some, I looked into Christianity seriously, and no, I'm not Muslim. Although the Prophet disagrees. The Prophet called me a Muslim. Yeah, Prophet Muhammad called me a Muslim. Yeah, Dawah is an invitation. The Muslims say that Dawah is an invitation. They invite to, right? So I'm inviting the Muslims to give me Dawah so that I can critique their Dawah. No, I want that way. I want to engage with Muslims. So I'm inviting them to give me Dawah so that I can critique their Dawah, because it generally sucks. No, things exist. We can see the things. The rest, you jumping from and inferring, Jafar. The rest you're philosophizing about. You're taking it into abstract domains. Okay, I'm going to continue listening. We are listening to, does the Quran go back to Muhammad? What do we actually know? We know what they can show is that it seems to point to Uthman, who then created 4 copies. And the 4 copies that went out seems to differ in small ways, but they differ with about 40 words. Isn't that interesting? The mushafs. Jafar, this is only according to what we can observe so far. Okay? And when you say that things cannot create themselves, creating is an act, and an act requires a doer, you are using your observation of humans and such things. Child of God the Father, according to the Prophet Muhammad, one of the hadiths, I'm a Muslim. I don't know, I'm listening to the academic. It's a few small words. Because they didn't have diacritical marks, so they didn't have, at the time, they didn't have any consonants. Some people would read, there's different readings of these mushafs, and there were some words that were read differently. Lala, about the origins of the Quran is the subject. All things are either bodies or their attributes. Actions are attributes. Something that doesn't exist doesn't have attributes. Jafar, have you looked at the the physicist Lawrence Krauss. Go and check out Lawrence Krauss's talk on something from nothing. He also wrote a book on that, Something from Nothing. So nothing is not, in terms of physics, nothing is not what you think it is. Child of God the Father, what did you answer? You didn't answer me. I told you, according to the Prophet Muhammad, I'm a Muslim. And you say, child of God the Father, Jesus is not Isa? Isa, you mean? Yeah. It would be interesting. How would you describe the difference? How do you know that Jesus Christ is God? Does he actually claim that directly in the Bible? I listened to a Christian last night who doesn't believe that Jesus is God. Interesting that, isn't it? Who's right? You or the other Christian? Who is the true Christian? According to your definition. And who says you're right? You see the problem that we're sitting with. All these different interpretations of Christianity. They can't all be right. And who says you're right? It's a bit of a non-humble position to take that. Just knowing that you're right. Okay, so we're listening to an interview by Derek Mythvision. He's interviewing Moraine van Putten, who's an academic, looking at the origins of the Quran.
And we don't know. It seems, but it's an important point, because what it does seem to show a memory of, because this is a very early tradition.
Jesus Christ claimed to be God. Can you give me the verse?
It comes from, say, the early 8th century, so we're talking, right?
Yeah, Fuzz, there's a lot of people that I'm pointed to. If you really seek knowledge, then go and listen to this guy. Or if you really seek knowledge, then that. Or just open your heart for that. And, that's... it's everywhere, and it points to different things, and different believers say these different things. I own about 240, my last count that I checked. 240, let me just check. 237 books in my library on Islam.
50 years of the canonization of the Quran, like 80-ish years. So this is about as far back as we can go with traditions. But it's a very well tested.
But I will make a note of that, Faz. Ahmed Didat. Yes. I've known him. I've made a note of him. I'll note him again. But every single one I've looked at so far, and I've looked at a lot, and every single one of the guys make fundamental logical errors. Best argument to give to an atheist? How do you mean? You need to show an atheist evidence. Wassalamu alaikum, Abdullah. No, because you need to give evidence. Don't. Right. So here's something that will. It's like if somebody now steps off the roof here, praying to God or claiming God will make him fly, and he actually flies, that will make me think. But then I want to check out what his magic trick is, because that kind of thing can be done with magic tricks, right? Or if I take a napkin and put it in water, and somebody prays and lights it on fire from the outside, that will make me think. That will make me go, oops, whoa, maybe I'm wrong about this thing that I'm thinking. Currently, what I'm yes, but they're clear as Jafar. Psi method assumes several things as a basis. Axioms, they're clear about the axioms, right? And you can go and question the axioms. Everybody's going free to question the axioms, test it. Go and actually test it and see what happens. Test it is the key thing. Yes, but it's just because we don't know those things, and then we state that we're unclear about those things. We're not trying to hide it, or scientists are not trying to hide it. And if they can test it, they'll test it. Disprove the axioms is the core thing of science. Disprove it. How do you mean, how do you test that the universe is consistent? This is the only thing that science can do, is kind of show what is consistent, right? It can't do everything. It's a specific tool. Yeah, how do you test if a God exists? Okay, we're going to continue listening to Marijn van Putten on does the Quran go back to Muhammad?
It's a tradition. And if there ever was a tradition that, we can say, well, probably something along those lines was separated by Prophet Muhammad, this one is pretty good. So we certainly said something like that. And at the time that these traditions get recorded, it's clearly about disagreement about what the exact wording of the text actually is. And the exact wording of the actual text, like the stuff they are arguing about, is not, did they pronounce this word as majreha or they did pronounce it as majraha, vowel difference or whatever. It was really about, the order of words, what the specific wording was. And that really shows where we get into trouble about, what are the exact words of the Quran? Well, clearly there were a bunch of different ways of doing it. And knowing whether, all of those variants were literally taught by the Prophet is, of course, unknowable, but there's enough of it that you can...
Unlikely, maybe?
Well, there's so many of them. So many of them, I think, it's perfectly reasonable. If he really was teaching these variants, that, not every time he was reciting the Quran to his students or his followers, he would have said it in the exact same way. So it's totally possible that some of these variants were being generated in that way, right? But who knows whether he really said it that way. But the important point is, once we get to the reading traditions, which agree on a lot, like tons of it, and that probably goes back to something earlier, because, why do they agree on so much? You could read the Quran in absolutely crazy ways, and they don't. They basically agree on the general, story that it's trying to tell. But what's kind of interesting with this question is, okay, so we have this text, it's very early. We have these reading traditions which are a bit later, but agree on a lot. So at least, the general gist is basically the same. So we know that. So we can go pretty far back with these readings. And we can go really far back with the Quran. But then the question is, is this Uthmanic text, is that the literal words of the Prophet, or the most authentic version of...
Reason is evidence? No. No. You use reason to understand evidence. Right? Reason is the reasoning about the evidence. Reason is not evidence, unless you're talking about deductive logic, Jafar. Deductive logic, according to my very stupid understanding, because I'm an idiot, deductive logic is the only type of logic that can get you to a necessarily true conclusion, if the premises are correct. Very important, if the premises are correct. All the other kinds of logic, so there's another part of logic that will get you to false, but the other parts of logic, the other ways of logic, are all probabilistic. Cannot get you to 100%. Deductive logic is the only one that can give you that level of certainty. And this is math, basically. And science, which you would use that, would preferably use deductive logic. And I'm kind of answering some of my own questions because I'm also trying to better understand knowledge classifications. So with what knowledge classifications and the certainty and accuracy that each type of knowledge and the methods of measuring the knowledge bring. It's different levels of certainty.
Of the Prophet. And no, that doesn't, well, maybe it's the most authentic version of the words of the Prophet, but it's not necessarily the only thing he ever said, or the thing we can say with certainty was the right thing that he said.
Yeah. Okay, so for those who are flowing in with super chats, I will get to you in just a moment. Bear with me here. We're just magnifying in here, and then we'll take your questions and we'll hang out and have some fun. I do have a cutoff limit with Marijn here, but we have plenty of time here now. So you mentioned something important, and my first interview, I didn't know my ass from my elbow. Okay, when I was talking to Shadi Nasser, I was like, so I just heard that there are early traditions, that they're already trying to burn certain Quranic manuscripts, that there's already this kind of like, we need to cut off this guy. And these are companions, okay?
And just on the burning of the Quranic manuscripts earlier, I've heard some explanations of that. But when you give an explanation, how do you know if it's true? How do you know that that is actually the case? Correct. Existence is not evidence of a deity, because you can make the same interpretations in the other direction.
This is a very big problem for me, being a skeptic, right? Which I have no problem with. Now, if I have a faith tradition, this is something I would have to wrestle with, and maybe cognitive dissonance would help me. But in light of this, I wonder if...
Child of God the Father, are you Muslim? It's an interesting name for a Muslim, because it's normally the Christians who would use the God the Father metaphor. It's an interesting take on it. Yeah, Andre Smith. I've looked at Christian Prince and Michael Licona and Sam Simone, etc., and the apologists are mostly laughable and clearly apologetic. They're not academics. So, and a lot of the Christian guys just try and denounce Islam, trying to show that they're right and Islam is wrong. And they're doing it in a bullshit way.
Some of these traditions really are something to take into consideration when we think about Uthman and him standardizing the text, and then using the lower palimpsest manuscript to go, is there reason before
Jafar, Devious Chris has got a point there. Show the evidence of your claims. Not just make the claims, show the evidence. Yeah, intelligent design. As I know that the Muslims like the watchmaker argument, okay, and that argument apparently is flawed. You cannot reach. Jafar, would you agree that you cannot reach a logical, correct conclusion using a logical error, logical fallacies? Now, the watchmaker argument, or using saying that the phone is highly complex and the universe is even more complex, using that kind of a thing, no, it doesn't imply a maker. Using that argument makes the error of a category error. Okay, you combining two different categories. You're saying that the phone is a similar kind of category as a human, which it is not. And then you're inferring a maker. You don't know that. You're just inferring.
Usman to think something different was there, even if it's somewhat similar. Like, is there a reason? You know?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. It's very important. It's actually kind of interesting that you bring this up. Because, of course, I mean, the explicit point of Uthman's standardization was to standardize the text, right? It's about people are not agreeing about the text, they're forgetting about how to recite it. Let's standardize it. And
is this not a good point? Is this not a brilliant point? That Uthman needed to standardize the text because it wasn't standardized. It wasn't agreeing. People wasn't agreeing. There were differences of recitation. Is this clear? Do you understand this, Muslims?
There's actually some nice traditions that seem to suggest that they really had a kind of method about this. You know, they really wanted to have at least 2 written witnesses of every ayah, and they wanted to have 1 spoken witness. Whether all of that is true, whatever, but you get some idea that some of this selection was really, there was an attempt at textual criticism to a sense. But of course, that necessarily implies that there were variants around, right? And maybe they got to the perfect one, but there was no Muhammad to tell him what the perfect one was, or his committee. And
good points, right? Jafar, what are your thoughts on this? What are we listening to? Did you hear this, or are you too caught up in your argument?
It's almost like the Gospel of Luke, when the Gospel of Luke says, look, I'm writing the best account. I've heard many other Gospels. I've seen it. I'm going to fix this. And then when you compare it synoptically to Matthew and Mark, you're going to go, there are some big differences between this. And we know Mark is earlier, though. Anyway, I'm just painting an analogy.
No. I think it's a good way of thinking about it in that sense. So it is a collection, right? It is a later collection. It's very close to the time of Muhammad, but clearly the reason why they found it necessary, and it's interesting because every now and then you see Christian apologists especially go like, and he burnt the Qurans, and it's like, and this argument doesn't work for most Muslims at all, because it's like, yes, that was the point, right? That's the whole point. The reason why he standardized the Quran was to get rid of all these variants. Of course he burnt them. So it doesn't actually, I mean, in my experience, for many Muslims, it doesn't register as a criticism of the text. They're like, no, I mean, we wanted to make sure that our text was properly preserved, and that's why we got rid of all the bad ones. It's like, what is the bad one is, of course, a question of faith, and what is the good one is a question of faith. But
yeah, how do you know what the correct one was then? How did they know they had to burn the bad ones? Which were the bad ones? How did they know? Why were they bad ones in the first place? Huh?
Ultimately, it usually doesn't register. So you get this very strange talking past each other, where Christian apologists are like yelling at Muslims, and the Muslims are, yes, he burned the Qurans. Who cares, right? So it's a really interesting thing there. But it brings us to this point of the Sana process. So let's talk about that. So in the 1970s, a whole stash of ancient manuscripts in a double roof in the Great Mosque of Sana'a was found due to water damage, and these were tens of thousands of folios, most of which were utterly boring from a historical perspective, just the standard text, and not from very early, but a bunch of them are very early, and several of them are actually very strange, but one is exceptional. And the one exceptional one is DAM 0127.1, or as we usually call it, Sana 1, or the Sana palimpsest, which is, when you first look at it, a totally boring manuscript, because the text that is written there is just the standard text. However, this is very rare for Quranic manuscripts, the lower text, so it has an original text has been erased, and a new text has been written over it. And the lower text is also the Quran, but it's not the same Quran. That is to say, the text isn't the same as the standard Uthmanic text. The differences aren't huge, but there's some important differences. So what do we see? We see that the order of the chapters is different. And
interesting.
We see that some orthographic things are a little bit different, but most importantly, the wording is different. So there's actually hardly a verse. Well, I'm not sure. I should really do the count. So I'll be careful. But lots of verses are actually worded slightly differently.
So he's being careful with his words, like a proper academic.
Never so much that you feel like, okay, this is a totally different text. It's still clearly the Quran. It's very, very similar, like strikingly similar. This is not. So, and to make this point, even though the chapters are in a different order, we don't actually have a single missing verse in the Sana palimpsest. So anything, like, even though the way the verse is formulated is a bit different, there's never a place where one is missing. There's one place where one seems to be missing, but it's a very, very clear haplography. So it must be something like that. Or paraglepsis, I should say.
Jafar, you say things have order. This requires will. No, you are positing You are philosophizing that it requires will and knowledge.
And what you get is but the wording, yeah, different, but never missing verse, never in a different order. So really, the text was already very stable. And what you can do, of course, then is you can compare the Uthmani text to the
Order equals entropy. Am I right, DVS Chris?
palimpsest and do critical, textual criticism and figure out which text is more original. What was the actual wording of the Quran? And once you get that, you sometimes have to admit, not everything that Uthman has is most likely the most original text. That's what you do textual criticism for. You have to figure it out. You have multiple textual witnesses, and it's hard to do with the Quran. Why is it hard to do? Because we only have two textual witnesses, right? We don't have 50,000 different copies that we can kind of use, but we have two, and we have to figure out, well, which one of these two is more likely, which is not always easy.
This is interesting. What's the two that he's talking about? Muslims, do you know? Is he talking to the two earliest Qurans, Mushafs? And why do we and Muslims mislabel these things? Why call a Mushaf a Quran? If you call it the proper name, then you wouldn't get that upset if something happens to it, right? I have a Quran that I got from a mosque. It was given to me. And it has water damage. Wouldn't Allah protect all the Qurans properly?
Now, there's something else to it, is that this kind of stuff, and one of the reasons why we think of the Sana palimpsest, it was clearly intended as a Quran. At the same time, it's important to note that it was erased and the standard text was written over it. Right? So this kind of seems to confirm.
The Sana palimpsest was erased and this text was written over it. Okay.
Confirm this destruction text was written over it. At the same time, it's important to note that it was erased and the standard text was written over it. Right?
So it was Sana palimpsest was erased and the standard text was written over it.
So this kind of seems to confirm this destruction narrative to some extent, that Uthman said, get rid of all your silly Qurans, we're going to do one Quran from now on. And that's basically what they did. They got rid of the text and put a new text on top. But the question, of course, is what's going on there? And what's interesting is that the Islamic tradition actually records stories about companions of the Prophet, other companions of the Prophet besides Uthman, having their own copy of the Quran.
Tim, just in terms of unknowns and extrapolations and all that kind of thing, and knowledge, recently I'm listening and trying to make sense of questioning science as the basis of knowledge. I can clearly see some of the areas where the scientific method or where science is actually broken, like peer review. Like in psychology, you have a replication problem. There's apparently a problem in astronomy, which would be a mathematical calculation problem, I think. But two people I'm listening to currently trying to understand more, and he's not explaining himself properly. First guy is Wolfgang Smith, and he talks about the error that we make with our current scientific paradigm in terms of where we philosophically come from. And he says that Plato had the correct idea, and he refuted Democritus, I think is the guy's name. And Democritus had the wrong idea, and Descartes kind of resurrected this Democritus error. That is what our current scientific paradigm is rooted within. So I want to understand that. I just hear him say it. I don't understand that yet. And the other thing that is interesting is if you go and listen to a guy called Bernardo Kastrup, makes a good argument for. So he comes from this perspective that everything is mental, and we should start there. You can't start with the external because you understand the external from this mental. We should start here from the mental in our thinking, in our understanding.
Written copy, right? Really, quite obviously, a written copy. Not how they memorize it or how they poorly memorize it, but really a written copy. And so we get this for Ibn Mas'ud. We get this for Ubay. Ali sometimes reported, but those two are the main two who really get reported a lot. And the kinds of variants, it's not that the Sanad says that we have is a copy of Ibn Mas'ud's Quran, but the kinds of variants that we see are very similar. The wording is mostly very similar, but slightly different construction here and there, slightly different wording. But that, of course, brings us to the question, can we literally know, which of these, if sometimes we end up with, 4 different variants of reading the same verse. It's which one is the literal way that the Prophet said it? You can say, one of these. You can say the Uthmani text is obviously correct, because, I don't know, because... Or you can say all of them are correct, which I think is a very nice, a way that the Islamic tradition deals with this. And all of those could technically be...
Doesn't make it true, though. Just because they explain it does doesn't make the explanation true. You need evidence for that.
True, but we cannot know for certain with any of these.
Exactly.
That's basically what it comes down to.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot here. And there should... One more thing, then we'll get to questions. Is
yes, he shall. In Islam, white stone turned black by removing sins. A stone has the power of God. In Islam, idolatry. Jafar says, no, God is something else, something we cannot comprehend the reality of. Then why try, Jafar? Why attempt in the first place? And why then assume that you know and have the knowledge and that it exists in the first place? Yeah, that comes from idolatry, Seashell, is my understanding. The whole Blackstone Qibla thing comes from an era of idolatry and was kind of just taken on into Islam as well, early days. So it became part of the tradition, was kept as the tradition kind of a thing. Yes, devious Chris, that's a very good point. There's a lot of stuff that is incomprehensible. That's funny. No, Jafar, you can also say the invisible pink unicorn. Do you understand the thing? It's something that is what is the word for this, devious Chris? It's like a making fun of religion thing to demonstrate the absurdity of religion. No, Jafar, there's no such thing as a unicorn. A unicorn is an idea. You are solidly in the area of metaphysics and philosophy when you talk about God.
The companions, in light of this, aren't some of the companions who were there with Muhammad demonized in the tradition? And if I'm not mistaken, it's almost like there's a few Judases in Muhammad's kind of...
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe to some extent, but the thing is, there's a bit of a political moving around going on. So I think you're mostly wondering about that. So
Right.
Ibn Mas'ud famously continued with his own Quran. And of course, by now there's a lot of suggesting, there's a lot of Muslim apologetics that would say, no. He accepted the final recitation of the Prophet on his deathbed, which we don't know if he actually did that.
Right.
We don't know if Ibn Mas'ud
Exactly.
agreed with that. What we do know is
There's a difference between what people say and what has actually happened.
that he continued to teaching his own Quran. He really had problems with the Uthmanic text. And we know for sure that actually continued. Why do we know? Well, because we have reports from Kufa, which is in Iraq, where we get people that say, I saw this verse written in this way in the Mus'haf of Ibn Mas'ud. So they clearly has copies of this alternative Mus'haf. We're waiting for the day for one of those to actually show up, and that we can go look there it is. But it must have been there. Like I don't assume that these medieval authorities were just lying or making it up, because it wasn't in their in their best interest to say, hey, look, there's all these variants, and this is other Quran going on. It would have been much more in their interest to say, no, there's nothing going on here. There's only Uthman. But they are very interested in it, and they use it for exegetical purposes. So very early on, it seems to have been clear. So this, we're talking about, and as late as the 3rd, 4th Islamic century. So we're talking 9th, 10th century. They're still talking about these copies and giving eyewitness reports of what was in them. So this stuff isn't made up, and the fact that it looks so much like these variants that we see in the Sanad palimpsest gives you an idea of like the kind of variation that was around. And so it's not the kind of stuff that we have in the Qira'ah today, so in the reading traditions today of the Uthmanic text, because they all follow the Uthmanic text. But these all have all these other variants. And,
Isn't that interesting, Muslims? When you go back far enough and you go and look at evidence proper, instead of just believing what you want to believe and what you hear, there's some other information out there different to your claims.
the differences are small. They're not that important. Many people in Quranic studies that are more interested in, the exegetical questions, which is not... Right. It's not...
Or theological questions.
Theological, right? They basically, even if they're not from the faith or they're doing this academically, they more or less assume that the Uthmanic text can be used as a useful insight into what what the 7th century was like, what Muhammad.
I see a lot of Muslims either had to go or they don't like this kind of academic discourse
was saying, and you can't really fault them for it, although I think every now and then we should maybe worry about these variant readings and think about it. Sometimes it's taken a bit too easily, and we still have to...
How do you explain the differences, Jafar? How do you explain the differences that he talks about, that they can show?
Bridge some gap. Even if you take an early canonization position like I do, it's not immediately there. And we know there was variation, so we can't just all assume, no, there's nothing.
That is what is said. How do we know that for a fact? That's a nice explanation. And the reciting them differently, how do you explain the different words and the different... Because it changes the meaning.
Going on. But still, I mean, mostly, and it's considered, fairly okay to assume that. And I think, that's something I think, for example, Stephen Shoemaker would criticize, and that's not completely reasonable. We don't know the actual text, the literal text of that Muhammad said. We just have the Uthmanic text, and we have the Sanad palimpsest, and we can reconstruct sort of what the text was like. The differences are very tiny, even things that have traditionally been...
And Jafar, this is my problem. Part of the problem that I have with any religion is that it depends on the different interpretations. This is not something like that is 100% knowable. It's not like science. Wouldn't you expect an almighty creator who's going to condemn people to hell forever to be a little bit clearer?
In identified as interpolations. We talked about this a while ago, actually. There have been identified as interpolations, or they're both in the Uthmanic text and in the Sana palimpsest. So if they are interpolations, they must have been interpolated in the ancestor of those two texts, right? So that's that's not like finding a Bible manuscript where the woman taken in adultery is suddenly missing. We don't have that. The best we have is slight.
Yes, Jafar, and that is something that I like about Islam, is that you're obligated to use your own minds and come to your own conclusions. However, you're still doing that within the constraints and within this presupposition that you have the correct faith here, the correct thing in front of you.
Different wording for an ayah, and
which doesn't make for good critical thinking.
Very often that.
Okay, then I will be rewarded. The mujahid is rewarded even if he gets it wrong. I'm probably wrong, but I'm trying.
That doesn't very often have a big impact on how we understand it theologically.
Or the meaning of it. Yeah. Okay, let's get to these super chats because goodness gracious, people have some questions. Please be respectful. That's all I ask in these super chats. Inquisitive Mind, big shout out to the Dutch Dynamite from the Ghost of Myth Vision.
Hey, Ghost.
You are. What's up, Ghost? Neophyte 1, is it possible Surah 53:23 is an interpolation?
Let me think about this. Is this let me look it up real quick.
Surah 53:23.
That's the with the satanic verses, right?
Might be.
Yeah, let me have a look.
Okay, this is interesting, Jafar. Just give me two explanations, please. One is the Mujahid definition, and the second one, Islam is the only religion which clears God from created attributes. Can you please explain that to me? The created attributes? Where the definition of God does not include attributes of creations. Is that what you mean? Am I getting that right?
It might be.
So imagine how many noble angels are in the heavens. Even their intercession would be of no benefit whatsoever until Allah gives permission to whoever He wills, and only for the people He believes.
So look.
Mujahid is one who qualifies to deduce judgments from Quran, Hadith, and Ijma. Okay. I need to go and check out Ijma. Ijma. What is Ijma? Brockdim, are you saying 1 in 4 people? What is your argument that you're making when you cite that 1 in 4 people on Earth is Muslim? Are you saying that a few billion people can't be wrong? So you're saying because a lot of people believe it, it must be true? Ijma scholars unanimously agree. Okay, Jafar, so Ijma is basically consensus, is that correct? Key points about Islamic scholarship is that Muhammad said his nation will not be unanimous. Yeah, but you see the problem with that, Jafar, is that you just automatically believe that. Just because Muhammad said it, it must be true. Is Ijma consensus, therefore? You do know that consensus is not scientific. Consensus is when a lot of people can be wrong. Its consensus is just agreement. Yeah, the consensus is there is no consensus. That's funny, Devious. Notice. If you notice this notice, you will notice that this is not a notice to be noticed.
If you look at this, like it's difficult. So the important point is if you look at the context of the verses above it, before it, they're all very.
Now, if I were at 1,000 subscribers already, I'd be able to share my screen, and you'd be able to see this discussion and where they're quoting the Quran and discussing it.
Short, very nice, very quick, etc. And then all of a sudden you get this big verse, which seems to be kind of apologizing for mentioning these pre-Islamic goddesses. Yeah, that kind of looks like an interpolation. But I don't know. People have very different opinions about it. So
Yeah.
the one that's supposed to,
We're in the area of opinion.
the crane verse is supposed to be in there, the original one where apparently the Quran said it was okay to worship these pre-Islamic goddesses as like daughters of Allah. That one looks like an interpolation too. So it's like you end up with two of these verses which are both unwieldy and long and kind of break with the rhythm of the text. And it's like, well, which one is the original? And I don't necessarily think, but it's possible. But we don't have any good reason to think it is, except that it kind of falls out of the tone of the pattern of the surah.
I definitely recommend anyone who's interested in diving into the whole satanic verses thing to go read Sean Anthony's article on that. So thank you for that question. Yeshua the King. Muslims say all 7 accepted qira'ats have no contradictions between the variants. Is that true? Also, is the Quran as well preserved as Muslims claim?
Yeah,
I think it's pretty preserved. I mean,
yeah. Well, so look. I get the thing is preservation. I mean, the question is like that word means. I'll take that first, and I'll take the other part of the question second.
Okay.
So, I don't know what preservation means, and so some people say perfect preservation. Well, no, it's not perfectly preserved. Even if you open up the Quran today, like more or less word for word, it's the same with Uthman, but some of the spellings are wrong. Now, I would say. I mean, it's clear. I mean, you can look at early manuscripts, and some words are spelled differently. Has absolutely no effect on the meaning.
Al-Wakarat. Let me check if I have that in my book. Do this. Make a note here. Islam. Al-Wakarat. Usul al-Fiqh. Fiqh. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Jafar.
If you're going to say perfectly preserved, I mean, is that perfectly preserved? I don't know. If you get the spelling wrong, I mean, that doesn't sound perfectly preserved to me. But does it matter? No. Now, and that only brings us back to Uthman. It doesn't bring.
Yeah, you see, some of the arguments and the wording that Muslims use hang them. Like perfectly preserved. Don't use the word perfect. Just use, say, preserved. Perfect means like 100%, which it is obviously not. And then you need to start explaining things, and you need to protect your position that you've now dug yourself into. Fiqh, yes, I remember, is jurisprudence. Usul, meta-knowledge, okay. Usul, meta-knowledge. A lot of these things, the problem with a lot of these things, Farah, Jafar, meta-knowledge. I'll tell you now. jurisprudence. Okay. The problem with most of these things, I don't want to go into the detail because the detail are up here. I still want to talk about the foundation. Why should we believe it? What basis does it rest on? And the basis that it rests on ultimately is hearsay, which is not evidence. It's not a good reason. Well, Jafar, why is that so? Why does it require a heavy basis to know why? That seems backwards to me. An almighty creator that is going to condemn people to hell for not believing should make it very clear, and easily very clear.
Further. And so, yes, after Uthman, he said, this is standard text now. Most people agreed with him. That was very carefully copied. But, is that as well preserved as Muslims claim? I think not.
So here's my key thing, is that it's hearsay. You have to believe a man that says that he heard an angel. One is an angel of God. How does he know that it's from God? Because Aisha said? Or because his first wife said? Secondly, so we have to believe him that this was the case and that it was not just something that happened in his mind. How does he know that? And another issue is how do we know that he memorized it correctly? He evidently didn't, because he recited it in different ways. Muhammad Badat, how are you? I think we had interacted before. I seem to recognize your surname, Badat. Yeah. I am looking at the Quran, and it's not actually about contradictions, but you see, another way Muslims hang themselves is that they make these claims about that the Quran is scientifically correct. Don't do that. Muhammad Barat, it was revealed in different ways to Akom. Is that true? Or is that just an explanation? Private, do not follow. Very interesting to hear. I'm not sure that I'm so interested to hear, but thank you. Muhammad Badat, do you know how science works? You know the evidence thing, right? That you can, it's replicable, repeatable, predictable. Evidence is the basis, right? All that science is testing the stuff. You've got an idea in your head. It's a hypothesis that you think is going on. And then you take that hypothesis, then you make a prediction based on that hypothesis, and then you run the experiment to test it. So it's just testing the idea based on predictions, right? That's all that science is. And then you are coming with a presupposition that science basis is flawed, not the Quran. I'm open to the fact that open to science being faulty. I've seen it being faulty in several places, not philosophically, not the scientific method proper, but in the execution. And recently, I've listened to two philosophers who claim that the scientific basis is flawed from a logical perspective, from a philosophical perspective. The one is Wolfgang Smith, who says that we should have a Platonic approach, and that Plato refuted Democritus, I think, and that Descartes then resurrected the Democritus error, which is what a lot of science is built on today, right? So I want to go and clearly understand that philosophical premise and conclusion to know whether that's true. And how can that be true if science is such a great tool of showing what is constant in the universe, with all its limitations? And the second guy that I've listened to is a guy called Bernardo Kastrup, who made a very clear argument about the starting position of the scientific enterprise, and the conclusions that we draw from there is incorrect, because it starts from what we observe on the outside, where we're still processing what we observe on the outside through this thing that we start from, our mental inside. So he says we need to start from this mental inside, first and foremost. And I also need to understand that better. Okay, I've missed again a lot of these. Jafar, thanks for your interaction. I loved having you on. You have interesting points that you're making, and I can learn from you. Come on again. Okay.
I think they claim it's word for word the same as God said it, and that we just can't prove. That's the way it is. Now, the 7 accepted qira'at, so these are the reading traditions. So 7 or 10 are now accepted. Because they are accepted and because they...
Yeah, Jafar, another that what you're saying now, the vast majority of Arabic lodges has yet to be translated, same with the ancient Chinese. Yes, same with ancient Chinese, but in terms of making claims on reality and saying that this came from the creator, etc., again, it's a very, very bad move. It would be a very bad move for an almighty creator. Surely he can do better.
They are canonical. A lot of work has been...
Private, you want to know the first name of the first guy on here that I'm listening to? It's Derek. His channel is called Myth Vision, podcast, Myth Vision. And he's interviewing Dr. Marijn van Putten. I don't know how, I can't remember how you say his name. Marijn van Putten.
Put into making these things stay the same and to harmonize them. We were talking about this just now as well. It's like how do you make the Gospels harmonize? Get them to harmonize. They say very different things, and you can do it. You can pull it off if you try. That's true for the Quran as well. Now, the differences aren't so big, but they don't say exactly the same. I mean, they necessarily don't say exactly the same because they have different wording. Is that really big? Is that a lot of trouble? No, it's pretty easy to harmonize them, but you do need to harmonize them, and that wasn't always...
This harmonizing need is not a good thing in terms of knowledge and in terms of showing that something is true, and this needing to harmonize shows a fumbling creator.
Is the goal, especially of early exegetes.
The name of the two people, Wolfgang Smith is the one guy, but he doesn't explain himself clearly. Okay, he sounds like a German guy, so it's difficult to understand him, but he's not clear in his explanations. And the other guy is Bernardo Kastrup.
We're perfectly happy saying, like, no, they say slightly different things, and I think this one is more likely, and then someone else might have a different...
So I'm going to get coffee. I'm going to keep on playing this because I can hear it in the background, but I'm going to get coffee. And please like the live, and please share it with at least 10 people so that we can get more people on. Share it with at least 10 people so that I can get this channel more liked and we can have more interesting discussions. And I can actually then show on the screen what I'm watching. I can share that. That's the main point.
Opinion, but
I'll be back.
at some point that kind of shifts, and they really become very obsessed with harmonizing all of it and saying that all of them are just as likely to be, literally from the mouth of the prophet, and that is kind of a shift in Shadi Nasser has worked on this, like this idea of tawatur, so of perfect and mass transmission. That's not a word that was ever used in the early centuries, but that kind of picks up, and at that point these things become completely unassailable. Once they become unassailable, you have to harmonize them because they are all literally the word of God. God can contradict himself, so therefore they must have no contradictions.
Thank you so much, Yeshua the King.
Some of them on the face of it do seem to be a little bit contradictory. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to use an analogy thinking of the Gospels because they're purposely writing their better versions of what they think is true for whatever reason, the literature they're writing. And then later on, of course, you end up having people like the Diatessaron being written to try and say, oh, this is the gospel. And anyway, thank you so much for this super sticker, Kasim. I hope I'm saying that right, Kasim. Thank you. Says hello, everybody. Yeshua the King again. Honest question. Is there any Islamic lobbying going on in universities that hinders certain scholars from saying certain things about Islam and or Quran?
No, really no. There seems to be, some kind of weird thing that's going on, and every now and then, I apparently recently some apologists, Christian apologists, came up with the ridiculous idea that I was being paid by petrol dollars. I really wish I was.
I'm getting paid by the Illuminati. You know what I mean?
Good, exactly. Excellent. So no, absolutely not. Look, in academia, we try to...
So what Maureen van Putting is saying here, and the question is there any Islamic lobbying going on in universities that hinder certain scholars from saying certain things about Islam and Quran? Which is a valid question. So Jafar, earlier you said something about getting the knowledge out there. I would think that, look, in the golden era of Islam, they protected and shared a lot of the knowledge. And that stopped. I would think that the sharing of the knowledge should be much bigger by now. It seems to me that Muslims are very much behind in the scientific enterprise and the scientific method, in the contribution that they're making to science and knowledge in the world currently. That it stopped when the golden era stopped. Within the reason they ask this question is that the perception is there, that there's knowledge that the Muslims don't want to share, that they want hidden, that they're not being honest. So a lot of these stuff need to be translated. I had this fantasy of starting a translation non-profit funded by the Arabs with their oil money to get all of this quickly translated using AI and all the rest. Now, part of this question that the guy is asking, an honest question, is there any Islamic lobbying going on in universities that hinder certain scholars from saying certain things about Islam and Quran? Is that this is clearly happening in the Christian area. There is lobbying happening in America. And they are, when you go and study biblical studies, you sign something that says you will uphold the Christian teachings. You won't speak out against it. Bullshit like that happens. And I think the question comes from saying, is the same thing happening in Islam?
To be respectful of this, of religion, it's very important for people, and I care about that.
I'm finishing coffee.
I understand that, for some people, this is the most important truth in the world, and that will, I have no interest in making people lose their faith. They can do whatever they want, but what's important is true. But of course, if you believe Islam is true, then what is true must be important. That's the way it is. And, that's how I go about it.
I do want to say, like, in this question, and this is coming from an atheist, I pigeonhole myself, okay, and I'm a skeptic. I try to be balanced here as a non-academic, but learning and researching in this. There is a reason that the West and East are connected through programs like what we were talking about before we hit record. Is it ICSA? ICSA, like, they're Western academics and Eastern academics, and they get along. Now, I'm not going to say...
International Quranic Studies Association, by the way, just so that everybody knows what ICSA is. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. ICSA, yeah, this is great. Go check out Dr. Reynolds' YouTube channel. I think it's the best an Islamic critical scholarship channel out there. I think anyone who's serious about this and you're enjoying what you're hearing today needs to go subscribe to him, and I'd love to interview him at some point. Fingers crossed, inshallah, it happens, I always said that to Shadi Nasser, and he's like, you say that whenever you think, like, you hope something's going to happen, or maybe we'll link up, and so I started doing that. But that doesn't mean there aren't specific individuals who get butthurt or angry or might send you an email. That's a different thing. I've heard that from Shoemaker and others.
Of course. I'm pretty active on Twitter. Every now and then people get angry at me, and, I block them. It's very easy.
But yeah, lobbying as a whole, that might take place somewhere. If something is said in a particular university in a specifically conservative area, maybe, but not.
But I've never felt in any way, hindered by what I can or cannot say. No.
Yeah, you just respect people in terms of not personally wanting to be overly Derek Lambert-like. No, I'm just kidding.
I think you're very respectful as well. So this is a good question. Please read it out.
Does Birmingham Codex predate Uthmanic recension?
No. It comes up every now and then.
Okay, I've got to make a call quickly, which means I'm going to mute my Okay, I'm for Dawal or Dawa. Dawa means, it's basically similar to evangelizing, telling people about Islam. I don't know if it includes convincing people. Generally, Muslims would use the word invitation to Islam. And Gimme Dawah is an invitation to the Muslims to invite me, to test their invitation. I need to make a quick call. Okay, I'm going to play this in the background while I'm arranging my kids to get here.
So just to give us a little bit of context about this, so the Birmingham Codex or the Birmingham Quran
Question. Kasim again with the super.
Could you hear all of that when I did my changes? Oh, I see. There's only 2 people on here now, it looks like. Mohammed Badat, welcome back.
Sticker, thank you so much for that. I didn't see any comment or question. I appreciate that. Inquisitive Mind, the ghost of myth vision. Did the early Muslims believe that Allah spoke Arabic, or did they believe that actually Allah spoke God language and that Quran is a translation of that God language done by Allah himself and sent down?
Interesting question.
Ooh, I don't know. I think that probably depends on the scholar you ask. So the idea of the Quran of Arabic being somehow special, and the Quran makes a point of being an Arabic Quran, and that very quickly gets interpreted as well. I mean, why is the Quran making such a point of being an Arabic Quran? Well, it must be because there's something miraculous about Arabic itself, and that picks up pretty early. But I'm sure the tradition is so broad. I'm sure there's other people who've had different opinions about that. I don't think that's what the Quran is trying to say. I think the Quran is trying to say, look, this is a Quran, this is a holy text that you'll actually understand because it's in Arabic now rather than Aramaic or Greek. But I don't know. I don't know how early did this view develop precisely because I never really looked into it. I'm sure there's some people who don't have such a literal idea that it was literally the Arabic words, and maybe it was translated. But who translated it? Was it Gabriel who translated it? Was it Muhammad who translated it as he was getting the God language? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Ghost. Bradford Baldwin, thank you for the super chat and being a member. Everyone, mash like now. Pause yourself and like. Thank you. Yeshua the King, are there any clear contradictions in the Arabic Quran, whether it's science, historical, cosmological, etc.?
Hey, Shin.
Yesterday someone on Twitter tagged me trying to argue that the moon was...
Private do not follow. Thank you for inviting, and Shinshin, thank you for joining that invite.
Literally split. I mean, if you think...
Shinshin, where are you from, and what do you believe? We are listening to an interview by Derek from Myth Vision. He's interviewing Marijn van Putten on the origin of the Quran and what we know and don't know.
That's what the Quran says. Then I think there's a clear contradiction there because that's not what happened. But that's not how academics usually understand that verse. They think it as more eschatological. So that means that only in the future, at the end times, the moon's going to split. If that's a correct interpretation, then there's no contradiction yet until the world comes to an end and the moon doesn't split. So I don't know. I honestly find the question incredibly boring. Not hating on you, Yeshua, but what I'm trying to say is obviously anything that is a contradiction can be understood in some different way. And
it's like when I engage apologetics, when I engage, I deal with the same thing, because no matter what, you can find a way to smooth it out. And
yeah, and it's possible. And it might not be the most likely thing.
I just want to go back a bit and hear what he said.
Eschatological, so that
means in the Arabic Quran, whether it's science, historical, cosmological, etc.
Like yesterday, someone on Twitter tagged me trying to argue that the moon was literally split. If you think that's what the Quran says, then I think there's a clear contradiction there, because that's not what happened. But that's not how academics usually understand that verse. They think it as more eschatological. So that means that only in the future, at the end times, the moon's going to split. If that's a correct interpretation, then there's no contradiction yet until the world comes to an end and the moon doesn't split. So I don't know. I honestly find the question incredibly boring.
Foundational thoughts with Dr. Imran, okay? Making a note of that. Chanel thoughts on YouTube. I go and listen to these guys, and then when I find a logical error after logical error, but I'll go and check.
Not hating on you, Yeshua, but what I'm trying to say is obviously anything that is a contradiction can be understood in some different way. And
it's like when I engage apologetics, when I engage, I deal with the same thing, because no matter what, you can find a way to smooth it out. And yeah,
and it's possible. And it might not be the most likely thing, but it's like, who knows? It's like, and the Quran is not an easy text to interpret. So any
Quran is not an easy text to interpret. Bad move on the side of an almighty creator, where he's going to condemn us stupid humans. He's going to have trouble understanding what he says. Bad move.
Even if there's a mainstream interpretation within Islam, which I would say is evidently counterfactual and not true, it's not always obvious that is what the Quran is saying. So you can kind of play around with this. But one thing you could come up with, if we're right in interpreting Dhul-Qarnayn as being Alexander, well, Alexander wasn't a monotheist, right? And that's how he is portrayed in.
Alexander was not a monotheist.
In the Quran. How do you go about that? Well, there's a couple of ways of going about it. First, we're wrong about him not being a monotheist. That's one way that people take. We're wrong about being Alexander. That's another popular way of thinking about it. Or there's a contradiction in the Quran. Pick your pick. I don't know.
Or you could do something like, I don't know if this has ever been done, but I imagine someone saying, actually, the early accounts that you have of Alexander the Great are wrong. And what Josephus says about Alexander the Great going to Jerusalem and recognizing the one true God, that's factual. So he actually was a monotheist. No matter what all your historical accounts say, you can find anything to do that.
Yeah. So with any I don't think, I think in historical inquiry, finding clear contradictions, that's hard, and it's especially hard with the Quran. The Quran is not an easy text to find clear contradictions because it's a difficult text. It's complex. Yeah.
Thank you. He says, Derek with the logical fallacies again. Laugh out loud, just kidding. Thank you for the super chat. Mr. Morpheus, Hadith, Muhammad said, learn the Quran from 4. Abdullah bin Masud, Salim, is that Madha?
Mu'adh.
Yeah, Ubay bin Khan. Yeah.
Well, so, if you do that, apparently, well, there's no Uthman in there. But, Ibn Mas'ud was very important, and that was very clear, and that's why they kept on taking his recitation and his own Quran very seriously, even after it had clearly completely fallen out of use in like ritualistic recitation. But it was still used for understanding the Quran and these kinds of things. Same with Ubay, who both, they both had their little version of the text, their own different version of the text. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Morpheus. He comes back again. 98% of the Quran read today are Hafs recitation, not Uthman recitation anyway.
Yeah. How do we go about this? So this is true, right? So Hafs and Asim. Hafs is a late 2nd century authority who transmits from the reader Asim, who's a mid 8th century, mid 2nd century authority, who is one of the canonical readers of the Quran. And this is by far the most dominant reading of the Quran today. But that's very recent. We don't really know when Hafs became dominant, but it's very clear if you look at early manuscripts. I have never seen a Hafs Quran before the 7th century. I'm sure they exist. So written in a reading of Hafs, I'm sure they exist, but I've never seen it. It's very, very rare. While, for example, Abu Amr, who was the Basran reader, is huge. You find him everywhere. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you open up a manuscript, anything from the 10th century, it's Abu Amr. And, he was really dominant at that time. But, all of these texts follow the Ottomanic text very, very, very closely. So the Hafs recitation is also, well, maybe not Uthman's recitation. We don't know how he recited the Quran. But it was certainly based on Uthman's recension. So we do have that.
Thank you.
Dependent on it, yeah.
Appreciate that, Mr. Morpheus. Yeshua the King again. Thoughts on it?
All right. Peeps, I've got to go and finish up for the kids coming and fetching a few things. And I've got to go to the shops and get a few things. We'll be on again later, probably. We'll see. It was nice having you all. Thanks for the chats and the follows and the invitations. We'll do it again.